Yes, Bill Hoffman. One of the more important observations I got out of listening to a lot of this stuff is how important the concept, if you don't measure it, you can't manage it is. Every one of the presentations we had metrics in it, and we are lacking metrics in many areas of the water business. So I was so happy to see the numbers really used here. I'm an engineer, I love numbers, but that was one of the takeaways I got out of this.
I've got a question for John Nielsen. We had some discussion around the Colorado River Basin and the Brazos River Basin, and particularly the areas above Travis and PK. And the question I guess I've had in my mind is, reports that inflows into both of those systems are, 50% off of average or historic average on multiple year basis. Do we have a good understanding of whether or not that's attributed to rainfall or evaporation or both, or are we still kind of looking to understand maybe better what's causing low inflows into those Travis and PK reservoirs?
I think it's anytime you have an exceptional, apparently unprecedented event like we're going through, it's a combination of factors. So there seems to be a role in rainfall, not just the lack of rainfall, but things that Brad, Lyon, and I have independently looked at, variations of extreme rainfall. We've actually had a lack of flooding events, which distinguishes the current drought from the drought of the 1950s, especially in central Texas, where it wasn't that severe a drought for the lower Colorado River because there was an occasional flood. So on top of that, then, there are other factors that can potentially be at work, such as conversion of grassland to shrubland, which increases evaporation, increased retention of water upstream, not just major reservoirs, but all the way down to the stock tank level potentially, as well as increased creation of wells that essentially add more straws to the subsurface flow. I think as a combination of all of those, and it remains to be sorted out what fraction of what we're seeing is attributable to each one of those. And I suppose the next question is what is the implication for the future? I think the vegetation conversion we've seen is basically complete. If anything, the climate change would decrease the amount of foliage and the amount of evaporation possibilities. But the expansion of suburbs and so forth is definitely not complete yet until it runs into a problem with lack of water. In terms of the rainfall, that would in principle be a random factor. Essentially, the weather's been too normal recently, which I never thought Texas would ever have, too normal weather. Going forward, though, as Brad also mentioned, you've got the increase of temperature going along with things, which tends to make it harder to get soil saturated because it dries out faster between events. So one thing I'm concerned with that came out in the last IPCC report is that we seem to be, especially West Texas, one of the places where the models are predicting a significant decrease of soil moisture and runoff at the same time, even though rainfall is supposed to be relatively steady. That's based on fairly crude models and global models, so it deserves looking into, but that would be, we could be seeing the start of that, but it requires a lot more study.
Appreciate the answer, and I do see it as one of those things that we should flag out of this as a key learning, is that we need to understand kind of the impact of temperature rise and evaporation on groundwater supplies and those high basin reservoirs. Appreciate the answer.
Yes, first of all, thanks to Danny Rival, the organizers, for really an outstanding conference. I mean, I learned a lot. I didn't have specific subject matter expertise in this area. I learned a lot today. But also as a metrologist and a person who focuses on quantifying things to really have serious advance, as Bill Hoffman said. Two things kind of stuck with me, and I'm sure there are many things in terms of path forward, but one was just this question. How much energy per volume of water is necessary to desalinate water of different impurity? So, you know, it would be very interesting to know what the genuine energy cost was of water purification to, say, acceptable human standards from different stock mineralized water sources, be they groundwater, ocean, et cetera. And then the second was really impressed by the ability to be much more intelligent about watering crops and understanding how to irrigate from like overhead sources. Of course, now there are some very long hang time UAVs that can get data, say, from 5 miles instead of from 120 miles, with sensor sets that will land every few hundred hours for maintenance and repair, et cetera. So it seems as though there may be a much more relevant economy of scale for doing overhead imaging at distances where much greater precision and resolution may be possible. And so maybe someday even real-time feedback possibly in terms of soil preparation and irrigation. So just to throw those two out as kind of questions about path forward. What is the energy cost of clean water if you're doing a desalination of various stock waters? And two, you know, can we really systematically explore the use of UAVs or other remote sensing modalities other than satellites that might achieve a better economy of scale for this sort of thing?
Go ahead and take the first one.
Take the first one, okay. And is Benny, Dr. Freeman still here? No. Okay. Yeah, and you know, just going back and looking at some of the cost figures and stuff you had. First place, like you pointed out, conventional desal, right? I don't get too close to this thing. I'll read back. But conventional desal of seawater right now, he said he had 3 to 4 kilowatt hours per cubic meter. That works out to be about 12 or 13 kilowatt hours, 12, 15 kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons. And you get back to, I mean, if you're doing RO on something with 1,000 milligrams per liter, you're dealing with maybe 3 kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons. I think that pretty much close with your figures there. And you can just take a log graph and extrapolate that out, and that gives you your energy component on there. That's significantly different from where it was a few years ago. If you're familiar with the Electric Power Research Institute, I chaired their desal committee back in the 90s. And man, we were so glad that we got it under 20 kilowatt hours per 1,000 gallons on salt water. So significant increases in membrane efficiency. Your transmembrane pressures, like I said, we're approaching the theoretical limits of what you can do, and still with osmotic pressures.
On your second question, the use of UAVs, in my presentation I had a picture of a drone, and some are using that. Certainly if the UAV technology is there, you know, you could probably do the exact same thing with that and have it available to more folks. Now, from a technological standpoint, I think that agricultural producers are looking for any opportunity now to go through and minimize inputs. You know, while food prices are higher, so are input prices. So any opportunity to go through and maximize their bottom line, they're going to take advantage of that.
Thank you very much.
On the drones, Texas A&M and at Corpus Christi actually is identified as a lead. But A&M is working in other areas too, and we're going to be bringing in a colleague from Utah State University who's the director of their water center, who has probably some of the most advanced drones, and they're using it for agriculture there.
Interesting. Yes, we're also collaborating with Texas A&M at Corpus Christi on the drone program. Mm-hmm. Also, just outside of Albuquerque, I think they call it the Gossamer, there are these new structures that have new UAVs that are solar powered that claim hang times of many months, if not years. Mm-hmm. And since they don't have the complexities associated with gasoline or other chemically combusted engines, they can fly at extremely high altitudes without deterioration of thrust. So there seems to be, again, some solar-powered electric aircraft that are just emerging now on the market that could offer multi-month duration from, say, a 5 or 6 mile vantage point. And again, I think the biggest thing is when you launch a measurement system, it's going 17,200 miles an hour in low Earth orbit, you'll have no practical economic way of recovery. Whereas with these systems, you can land at, if they're in the far infrared, replace cryogenic systems, do whatever's necessary to really sustain a enduring measurement set without the level of expense of satellite systems.
They fly in 50-mile-an-hour winds.
Well, they have a certain wind in which they can hang against. Yeah, that's a good point.
I understand the FAA is having some questions about commercial use of drones
Right,
at this time.
exactly. You don't want these on the jet stream or in the jetways.
Mark?
Thank you, Danny.
I was just going to follow up briefly on the cost of the desalinating brackish water. In El Paso is about $600 to $800 per acre foot. So in the neighborhood of $1.70 to about $2.25 per 1,000 gallons.
Right. First off, Danny, thank you and TAMEST for putting together a great program today. I've got one of those what's it going to take questions. As we've heard discussed today, a lot of different technologies, a lot of different things that have been done around the world, other places, and whatever. But it seems like, as I remember as a kid, when you go to the swimming pool and there's this long line of people waiting to see who's going to go off the high diving board first. For a lot of these bold moves and new infrastructure in the state of Texas, whether it's desal, the reuse side, ASR, some of these bigger, newer projects that might have been done elsewhere in the world, to get those things really moving in Texas, do we have to have a community of 100,000 people run out of water?
Well, apparently not, since, for example, Wichita Falls is coming online with direct water reuse. The threat of running out of water is sufficient for them and sufficient for San Angelo to tap into a radioactive aquifer before they can renew with radioactivity. So I think that's one of the things that happened with this drought, that the threat became the critical. I want to make an observation with respect to this conference in that regard, titled Securing Our Future. And I think Tim Finley in the last session, or next to last session, was the only one I noticed who actually used the word securing in the context of Dow. And so I wonder whether, a drought of record type scale, which is sort of an inaccurate 1 in 100 year event, is sufficient for securing, when securing means allowing companies to come here without any worry of running out of water. I think 1 in 100 is a little bit low for that. And I think we need to have a policy dialogue on what standard of security Texas wants to shoot for.
Let me yeah. And I know we've discussed this before. Thank you for your comment there. A couple of interesting things here too. I see on the industrial and commercial type sectors, I am seeing more and more using on-site sources of water within facilities. A cheese-making plant that takes and runs it, uses nanofiltration. They collect the water that they collect from that, from the milk. And it becomes 50% of the water they use for their in situ cleaning of their pipes and their tanks and everything like that. I am seeing more and more of the alternate on-site source stuff. All the new stormwater rules are making the use of stormwater economically feasible. So let's don't forget the on-site components of all this. It is becoming economically feasible. They are doing it, and we need to make sure that our regulatory environment is good. Our gray water rules in the state of Texas are woefully outdated, and we don't have anything for AC condensate, foundation drain water, or stormwater reuse on site in TCEQ rules. We need to fix that right away to make some of these things feasible.
And I'll just follow up briefly. I think people are seeing this as a crisis, but even when we see bridges collapsing, we don't go in and invest in the infrastructure that's needed. And if it starts raining tomorrow, and as John was saying, West Texas is supposed to be wetter than average after an 8% of a 30-year average inflow in the river this year. I mean, this is 15 years of drought. But if it rains, the legislature is going to say, and most people, well, gee, we've avoided it. Let's move on. So it's going to rain.
I don't know. That's what the rainy day fund is for.
Okay, I'm Johanna Arndt with Water PR, and my question does have to do with security, but this one is more about water quality. I'm sure a lot of you heard about the scare that happened within the last month where a quote-unquote bad substance they thought it had entered the Rio Grande River and may have made it all the way to, I think it was the Falcon Reservoir. And so far it looks like there hasn't been any effect to the drinking water quality, thank goodness, but I think it was a little bit of a wake-up call about the vulnerability of a lot of our water sources for drinking water, agriculture, any number of uses. And I just wanted to ask you guys what you think about the vulnerability of our water sources to contaminants. I know the TCEQ tracks potential sources of contamination, and some source water areas have a lot more than others. And do you think there's an adequate amount of controls on those at the moment?
Anybody from the audience?
I'll defer.
I think from an agricultural standpoint, I think that we're confident in the chemicals that we use. That even when you have areas, and there was a couple of years ago when they talked about atrazine, but we have practices in place where that doesn't become an issue. So I don't think that we're concerned and see the vulnerability being there for contamination of water supply from agricultural operations anyway.
I'll take a crack at it if you want. I mean, I do water tax for grab the mic. So in some respects, kind of as a wastewater generator, I'll say, boy, we've got plenty of permit limits to deal with. On the other hand, there are new and developing chemicals that get discharged, medicines, endocrine disruptors, those type of compounds that don't show up in MPDS permits for municipalities and others. And so certainly if you go out there and search the research, in terms of kind of the historical priority pollutants, I think we're incredibly well covered. In more water-soluble things like medicines that people take, there is an ongoing awareness that I think needs to be considered. When you start talking about membranes, most of the membranes have both a molecular weight cutoff and some sort of ionic function. And so, there was a question earlier about how well do membranes remove, some of these problematic compounds. There's papers out there on a plant called Water Plant 21 in San Diego, that shows that they take a lot of these compounds to far better or lower levels than what is in surface waters today. All in all, I still drink all the public water, from wherever I go, so I feel like it's safe. On the other hand, as we, use more medicines, those types of things, there's an importance to be aware of kind of what's in the water.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment as a former trustee for the American Water Works Association, which is the main association for water treatment facilities. They have committee after committee on these very issues. There are two or three different things going on. One is we talked about the endocrine disruptors and the pharmaceuticals and et cetera like this. That's a huge concern. That's something we are doing to our water all the way along the way here. There's all forms of natural pollutions and runoff, but then there's also the way the water business has changed significantly on 9/11 in 2001. And we realized the vulnerability of sabotage like that. So there are all kind of committees looking at these types of things. We get into our watershed protection and everything like this. So it is a huge topic out there, way beyond, I think, what we can even try to discuss today. But one of the key elements of water efficiency is don't dirty the water up in the first place, so it's ready for use.
So it's good. Okay.
Hi there, Trey Mabin with National Oilwell Varco. Again, thank y'all for a fine set of conversations today. Got just a generic question. There was a compliment paid a little bit earlier with respect to commercialization of technology, and it seems like a lot of the challenges that we have are going to require innovative, technologies to be commercialized all the way through. Would y'all mind discussing just a little bit of the challenges that might exist for groups or organizations to go from technology to business within this space, and things that maybe we could do better or that we're doing well already?
Let me comment some from the agricultural standpoint. I think in the past we've relied heavily on extension service and those types of public entities to help provide information for agriculture, and funding resources for all extension programs have been reduced nationally, and we're actually falling behind other countries as far from a research standpoint, agricultural research standpoint. So without having one of these guys have to go through and promote their own organization, I'll say that we need to further research or further fund the extension resources and try to get technology out to our members.
If no one else is going to mention it, I'd have to say the biggest barrier to implementation of innovation in water is still $3 or less per 1,000 gallons compared to $3 a gallon, as in gasoline.
Amen.
Okay.
Okay, I'm an oil and gas guy, and so all I know about water I learned 2 years ago at the last TAMEST Water Summit. And so I am impressed by how much we know and how much I've learned today about people who know what we should be doing going forward. And at the same time, Bill Hoffman, I understand your comment about how little we know. At the same time, I think both those comments are true. What my question is from a TAMEST standpoint, we have a reservoir of members of the national academies who are interested in helping. And so the question is, where do we go from here in order to address some of the problems you guys already know we have and some of the solutions you think we should be doing? And is there a role for TAMEST other than every 2 years, let's have another Texas Water Summit where we'll talk again about the same problems and where we think we might go?
We'll take names for the next chair, by the way.
Yeah, as long as Danny is around, we'll have one in 2 years, but I'm not sure we'll have one after that, okay? So really open focus. I mean, what is it we as an audience or we as TAMEST could be doing to help advance some of what needs to be done?
Well, if I could start out, because thank you for allowing me to say that in my pie charts that I showed there, where so much of the water that we use is in the institutional, commercial, and industrial sector, and we've talked about a lot of technologies here, it is an area ripe for two things. Number one, academic research, and then academic classroom. I don't know of many classrooms that are focusing on looking at this whole industrial and institutional commercial type water efficiency like they are for landscape irrigation and crop irrigation. And I think that just getting people started from multiple disciplines in that area is one thing to do. There's more research needs out there than I can try to think about, but that's one of them.
There are a number of, in addition to the universities, and research funding has been cut commensurate with extension funding. Over the past 2 years, what we've seen reductions in the neighborhood of 25 to 50% of some of the research programs. That doesn't help. The $2 billion fund doesn't provide for research. And so we're looking at working with TWDB, the water utilities across the state, AWWA, to really get this information across, because all these programs or projects have been proposed, and they're prioritizing them right now for the possibility of getting some of these funds. Somebody's going to need to look at both the technical and the economic details and really give a close evaluation. That fund won't begin to cover these projects, at least not at one kick.
Well, let me just follow up. Is that something we can, whoever in this audience is interested in that, can form some kind of committee, or is there already committees doing that this would just be a waste of time to parallel what's already being done, or is there another way through the TAMEST organization maybe to influence the policymakers who need to be influenced by creating an unbiased peer review committee kind of thing?
Well, it'd be peer review, but there needs to be funds for it. And that's probably the biggest drawback.
Could I follow up on that just a moment before we go to the next question? Is that, are there specific matters of law or policy that currently limit our ability to address our future water needs that we need to highlight? That are things that we had some political leadership here, we have staffers associated with that political leadership here. Are there things that we should help point out to them?
Property rights, the water management institutions. We have a large irrigation district out in far west Texas, but there are somewhere in the neighborhood of, and I wish Wayne Halbert, is Wayne still here? There are about 28 irrigation districts in the lower valley, and they all operate with their own boards. They have their own sets of rules and sets of prices. In some cases, the farmers own the water, but in many of the cases in the lower valley, it's the irrigation district. So there's little incentive for farmers to conserve because they have to pay for the operation of that district, whether they take the water or not. And so there are a lot of policy issues that could be addressed.
So that's more of a take or pay issue, though, as opposed to an ownership issue, though.
Well, if you're a member in that district, you're going to have to pay for the operation, those fixed costs, the canals, the management, the delivery, versus the typical municipal take or pay contract, where they're looking for that security of, we need to get paid, whether you take the water or not, because we built this project.
Well, in that particular area, though, in the valley, when there's other demands, the other demands have precedent.
Right.
And they may not want to follow the experience of the rice farmer selling the irrigation district to the water authority.
That's right.
I have a partial answer to that question, because that was related to the question I was going to ask. The Conference of Urban Counties has thrown out the figure that if you took the urbanizing areas in the state of Texas that are outside the incorporated municipalities, they would be equal to combined together, it would be the 5th largest city in the United States. The problem that we have in Texas is that these urbanizing areas and the unincorporated areas, counties have no authority for land use. And my question was going to be, given that condition, how can we help this amazing technology that's evolving get that married with the drivers of the sprawl and the pave-over that are covering our aquifer recharge areas and everything else in the state? There's a disconnect there between the business sector that's driving that and the technology and the resources that are available to help solve the problem. So I pose that question. It's a policy issue, but we don't have the authority, and I can tell you I don't think we're likely to get it, given the nature of the legislature. So we're going to have to look for creative ways, and I challenge you folks to look for your commercialization in creative ways.
Yeah, if I could, one thing that was just only mentioned one time here, we had some legislation last time that established a program called PACE. And if you want to Google PACE in a box, it is a private funding mechanism for the industrial, commercial, and agricultural area to implement energy and water conservation. So we are looking at innovative funding here in the state. We have one of the only programs that include, there are a lot of PACE programs that have energy in them, but just ours is the only one that really was designed from get-go on water. So looking at these alternate funding mechanisms out there, and I'll go back to the other thing. One thing to get a lot of these new technologies implemented is we need to be training the engineers and scientists at while they are in college about these technologies to get them out there. And that goes beyond that. I'm talking about the social sciences and everything else that is involved in that. I think that this is just a key thing for that.
The example you brought up is a wonderful case of the economic costs aren't being recognized. And there are many of those in water, but development And one area, going back to Danny's question, that could be helped is to work with these communities to charge impact fees. So some places have no connection charge for water, and many communities that really cost, the other ratepayers are paying $1,000 to $2,000 in many cases for each new home to be connected to the water system. And
I'm Richard
not
Seeline.
a popular.
I'm Richard Seeline with the Texas Water Technology Accelerator. I want to respond to very quickly to the gentleman's question. After this, I'd love to visit with you about what we have been kind of quietly surfacing with the 18 academic research institutions, the 4,300 water entities, and the 5,000 corporate small, medium-sized, and large-scale users, because it plays to something that we want to partner with TAMEST on. But let me respond. I think, Bill, you said something, and so did Jay somewhere along the line today. Texas is this phenomenal incubator. It's got the most incredible geographies that you could possibly have. And we think we've calculated that the technology market share for Texas is $80 billion out of the, in a sense, the larger part of the U.S. So I think I would pose 2 or 3 questions in a very simple, and that is, we've got to be able to tell case studies. We've got to explain this to folks. So let me use 2 examples of that. Small town in West Texas has 3, and I would hope that Jim Dannebaum doesn't throw a shoe at me when I say this, but there were 3 engineering firms that came into a small town in Texas and told them to revive a dormant well would take about $2.9 million. A technology company that we would list as a technical services firm came in and did it for $160,000. It's a $2.7 million differential between the cost that was predicted and the technology that was used to bring the water well. The other end of the extreme is, there's a lot of smarter brains in this room than I'll ever be. I flew back to the East Coast last week. Young man from Detroit is sitting next to me. Y'all probably know this, that a couple of thousand people from around the world go to Uvalde to watch tires get tested. Do y'all know that? Okay. All right. Not Detroit, but in Texas. All right. And guess what they do for 4 hours of every day? They spray the concrete down with rainwater, or actually the version of what they believe rainwater. There's about, I think, about 200 people that would lose their jobs. I think that's one of the things that we've got to be able to do, Bill and Jay and others, is through TAMEST, through all of us, we've got to be able to tell these stories of where technology actually has a way of, in a sense, changing the dialogue on everything from savings all the way over to job generation. And Jay, you and I have talked about this. We've got to be able to say this in a way that, frankly, there's smarter brains than mine would ever be, Ph.D. scientists. We got to be able to not talk down to people, but in a sense explain to folks why these technologies are so relevant that the rest of the world's already adopted. So that's really a question. There was a question mark there.
Is there an answer?
Well, since my friend Richard Seeline has used my name, and my friend Ken Arnold has outed both of us as highly opinionated fellows that are here to learn as opposed to teach. But I would say on the one example, the difference between ethical engineers and unethical engineers is a quick summary to the differential that he gave reference to. But I would say that based on the highly entrepreneurial nature of business in Texas, that maybe partial answer to Ken's question, that if you show people, business large and small, their enlightened self-interest, if we feed our Texas economy with carrots until they've eaten all the carrots they can, you can bring out the sticks later. But I think you can count on Texas business to do what's in their enlightened self-interest for lower cost, better use, ensuring their long-term supply. And I think the majority of public agencies have leaders that are serious about. I happen to have served on the board of the Coastal Water Authority, which transports Lake Livingston water, which the lady earlier in the day questioned as to if there are any benefit projects, and that's been supplying roughly 4 million people with very low-cost water. I served on that board for 18 years, was president of it for 6 of those 18 years. So I think you'll find public agencies are just as entrepreneurial as businesses if the information is distributed where they can make the right kind of decisions. And then when the gaps are still there, then the legislature can impose either restrictions or incentives, whichever is most appropriate to finish the job. But I'd concentrate on spreading this, Ken, information that we've all learned here to everybody who can make use of it. And congratulations to all of you for your forward thinking, your outstanding research, and what you're doing to advance the cause. Thank you.
I think we'll have one more question before turning to the carrots and glasses at the courtyard.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Jennings. I'm the meteorologist with the Texas Weather Modification Association. We just got done with a study with the Southwest Research Institute that shows that we are enhancing aquifer recharge by roughly 500,000 acre-feet a year across the Edwards-Trinity Plateau. My question is where do you see the role of weather modification in the future? And what could we do to increase the confidence in what we're doing, make sure people believe that what we are doing is indeed working? Thank you.
Well, let's see. Take the second question first. You can start by sending me a copy of the study. If I believe it, I'll help increase the confidence of the rest of the state. But yeah, the challenge of the challenge of weather modification is partly that it's somewhat subject to the whims of nature, and so people have to understand when it's going to be useful and when it's not going to be useful. And the middle of the drought is one of the least useful times, of course, because there's not much to deal with. So it works best for places where you've got long-term storage, and consequently can have the capacity to store up extra water during wet years that you can then rely upon in dry years. So I think it does have its place.
One of the questions I think our folks have, and you know, I don't know when exactly this happened. I got a phone call about 1.5 years ago talking about weather modification, and this gentleman was upset because he thought it was going on near his area and hailed out his corn. So there's always that. There's a degree of uncertainty, I think, and it may have nothing to do with what actually happened, but there's certainly that perception. And I guess the other is, if you go through and you're seeding clouds and you're causing it to rain in one area, are you then taking rain away from another area of the state?
Well, first, talking about the hail, the process of rain enhancement is actually a suppression of hail. Okay. So we do have data that suggests that we do have less hail. In fact, Canada, near Alberta, they fund millions of dollars to a hail suppression program up there. And the benefit cost analysis far outweighs their budget. Second, we've been able to show that there is a positive downwind effect. Within the San Angelo target area, we're seeing about 102% of normal in the last 10 years. If you look west towards Midland, they're running about 89%. However, east of us is about 99%, so there's a 3% difference. But the data gets real skewed when you go further east, so that does suggest a positive downwind effect. And the analysis done by Texas Tech does show we're seeing increased lifetime of clouds by 10 to 15 minutes, in some cases hours. So those are both a lot of the questions we do get, but we have all the data that can answer those questions for you if you'd like us to pass that on to you.
I will say those of us around Lake Buchanan are looking for that positive effect. All right. With that, I think welcome all of you to retire to our courtyard, and there is a reception. I hope that the discussion will continue to go for some time. Thank you again.
I really like to kind of